Hi, thank you for joining us. I'm Dominique Lukey, and it's a pleasure to welcome you to today's program, The Case for Electoral Reform, a Veteran's Perspective. In today's political climate, it's difficult for an elected official to be a problem solver. Low turnout partisan primaries assume an outsized role in elections. Elected officials who do work across the aisle can often be primaried as a result. In many ways, the stage is set for conflict and gridlock. Veterans for All Voters is a nonpartisan organization actively working towards electoral reform. Today's program, moderated by Rusty Cunningham, will dive into their efforts to mobilize military veterans to advocate for election innovations. They strive to unlock gridlock, make politics less toxic, and our government more effective. Today's panel will review the underlying problems with our electoral process and discuss their plans to support Final Five voting. There will be time allotted for questions from the audience as well. A big thank you to our program sponsors, Dave and Barb Scogan, Festival of Foods, Joe and Pat Heim, Ann Bryce and Bill Haviland, Tom Houlihan, Suzanne Young, and Leader Ethics. Our program hosts are the La Crosse Tribune, the Winona Daily News, the Chippewa Herald, the La Crosse Area League of Women Voters, Democracy Found, and Leader Ethics. Thank you so much for your continued support. And now, I'd like to turn the program over to our moderator, Rusty Cunningham.
Thanks so much, Dominique. As we enter a presidential election year, it's clear our political system faces plenty of divisiveness. Some blame voter apathy, others blame the political parties, especially the primary system of forwarding candidates for general election. It's an honor today to introduce a pair of veterans who are fighting for change. Eric Bronner is founder and chief operating officer for Veterans for All Voters. An attorney, he served as a naval flight officer from 1997 to 2005. He is an outspoken critic of the partisan primary system that removes the voting influence from the majority of citizens, often quoting the mantra, "A bad system will beat a good person every time." He is a former board member for Show Me Integrity. And welcome to Joshua Wilson. Josh is a Marine veteran, a community builder, and a former public defender with a commitment to public service. And he is committed to electoral reform that will promote integrity over political divisiveness, problem solving over political opportunism. He is a Wisconsin state leader for Veterans for All Voters, an attorney. He is the entrepreneurship coordinator at the University of Wisconsin-Eau Claire. Gentlemen, thank you very much for being with us and welcome. The first question I would have for both of you comes after the thing that's most important I say to you, and that is thank you for your service. Could you please give us a rundown of your military service? First Eric and then Josh.
Sure thing. And Rusty, Lee, everyone, thank you so much for having us. My name, as Rusty said, is Eric Bronner. I actually grew up in Menominee Falls, Wisconsin. I'm the son of Milwaukee public school teachers. I was appointed to go to the Naval Academy by Congressman Sensenbrenner, who ironically my parents had never voted for. After graduating in 1997 from the Naval Academy, I served for 8 years as a flight officer in the E-2C Hawkeye, flying on and off of aircraft carriers. Came to St. Louis, Missouri. My bride is from rural southern Missouri, and St. Louis was the compromise between Wisconsin and southern Missouri. And we've been here ever since. I went to law school, practiced for a little bit. But as far as the service goes, it was 8 years from 1997 to 2005.
Your service, if you would, please.
Howdy there. Thank you again to everyone for having me. I really appreciate this opportunity to speak with you today. I come from Central Georgia, a rural community, and there was not a lot of opportunities for a young man graduating high school at that time. And so I joined the Marine Corps on my 18th birthday. I was shipped out to Parris Island, where I learned about honor, courage, and commitment. I served for 4 years as an aviation ordnance technician. I had no idea where I was going to go. I was one of those open contract Marines, so I have a different background and probably a less thoughtful entry than Eric did. But I was able to deploy to the Middle East via the 26th MU and to Africa and Djibouti to do combat support over there. And it radically changed my life, taught me the value of service, gave me a wonderful sense of culture, and introduced me to what efficiency and teamwork could look like in a way that you don't really see in small towns. So I've been forever impacted by that. And I took that military service experience and I didn't immediately continue to follow up with it. I worked for a while and did odd end jobs and kind of found myself in my early years, but I eventually found myself working at a nonprofit that serves veterans, America's Warrior Partnership. And then later I worked with the Wisconsin Veterans Chamber of Commerce. And that's where I've learned about how to serve community, how to work to prevent veteran suicide, and how to improve the quality of life of veterans all over the country. And it's probably one of the most rewarding career choices that I've made, and I'm happy to bring that forward here and continue to talk about service with you.
Well, both of you are to be commended both for your military service, but since then as well. I have to tell you, I truly admire people who continue to find ways to serve, even when their official role may end. After your military service, there are so many issues you could have chosen to tackle, and yet you chose electoral reform. Could you please tell us why you chose that and tell us about Veterans for All Voters?
So electoral reform kind of chose me in two different ways. One is I'm a lifelong independent voter. I'm one of the close to 60% of military veterans who's never identified as a Republican or a Democrat or joined either party. I've also been interested in politics my entire life, ever since my political career peaked in Ripon, Wisconsin at Badger Boys State. It's been all downhill since there. But I've wanted to get involved, and the first thing everyone says is, Eric, pick a team. You have to pick a team. And for an independent, that never sat right with me. In the fall of 2018, I heard a podcast on Freakonomics Radio called America's Hidden Duopoly, featuring Catherine Gale, Wisconsin businesswoman Catherine Gale, and Harvard Business School professor Michael Porter. That podcast for me was so compelling that I said, one, these sound like real solutions. I'm tired of being gaslighted by the parties with these false solutions that are all about them protecting their own party and their own power and control. These sounded like real solutions. So my first question was, who's doing this work? And that's what led me to Show Me Integrity, was a brand new cross-partisan reform organization here in Missouri, working on many of the reforms that we're now working on across the country. And we passed a nonpartisan approval voting system in St. Louis. And I was working the polls for that campaign. A veteran saw my passion for the work and said, Eric, you should do something to get more veterans involved with these reforms. And that was the idea that after about a year putting together a kitchen cabinet of veterans from all over the country, all over the political spectrum, is there a need for another veterans organization? What would our mission, our focus be? And this group came together, really outstanding servant leaders. And we launched in Wisconsin. Veterans for All Voters launched in Wisconsin, in Madison, in October of 2021. So that's the backstory of how I got into this. And then Josh is one of our really solid, one of 300 veteran state leaders in 47 states.
Eric, we're having a bit of a problem picking up your mic, I believe. Could you just maybe check once on your audio?
Sure.
Thank you.
And if Josh wants to go ahead.
All right. Tell you what, I have a question for Josh while you're checking, Eric. Josh, as a former public defender, I know you have a strong sense of public service. Please tell us why it's so important that integrity went out over divisiveness when it comes to politics.
Yeah, thank you for the question. And I think I can answer that question in tandem with the previous question, sort of why Final Five? So going to law school was revolutionary for someone like me. First generation college student first generation law school student, seeing the way that the world worked from the point of the view of the founders, the legislators, understanding the operations of the U.S. government. That's something that when you come from rural America like I do, it kind of blows your mind because you're sort of taught that you have so much autonomy and control. And then you go to these advanced schools and you learn about the intricacies and the connections between people. One thing that stood out to me is particularly important that tie in both my rural background, my military service, and my law school experience is that if you can change the rules of the game and the structure, then you can create nonpartisan revolution. It doesn't have to be divisive, right? There's a time when nations are in prosperity that it's probably easier to allow politicians who might be entertaining or might be spectacle driven or might be virtue driven. But we're at a time now where we need healthcare and housing and serious direct issues, not emotional hot button issues. And the veteran service was unique to that point. And one of the things that we do to connect to other veterans is we let them know your political disposition is not important to us. Your party is not important to us as much as giving back, ensuring that there's competition in politics, and specifically ensuring that individual voters are represented. Setting party aside, that's something that George Washington did, right? Like he refused to accept another term in the presidency, sacrifice. And that's ingrained in veteran values. It's ingrained in every branch and every era. And so that's something that connects us all together is this understanding that there are things more important than our values, than our feelings on abortion, than our feelings on, gun control, on issues that people get excited about. What's more important is that we actually have a Congress that functions and can pass budgets, and they can approve healthcare measures, and they can help us do cost control, and maybe even, pull government out in some senses. I understand the conservative point of view is that we have a more accountable government. All of these things are wonderful, but the practice has been lost in exchange for the spectacle. Integrity can bring it back. And integrity can be reflected if we look at the fundamental principles in the Constitution. Both can be represented through sacrifice and service and through the objectivity that one finds in law. And so these things are really ingrained in me now. And that's why I continue to stand by Eric and the other veterans as we really just beat the drum to ask for some objectivity and some competition and some representation.
Terrific. Eric, I know you describe yourself as a fierce critic of the partisan primary process. Could you please tell us why?
Sure thing, and please let me know if I'm not coming through loud and clear.
Thank you.
Can you hear me okay, Rusty?
Yes, thank you very much, Eric.
Sure. So, I saw this yesterday, a question of if our primary system was working, we wouldn't be headed toward a repeat of 2020 when over 60% of Americans don't want that. The one thing every person I speak with agrees on is that the system is not working. And then, as I said earlier, both parties love to gaslight us with false solutions that keep us stuck in the status quo. And so I'm a critic of primaries because I'm a firm believer that they are the primary problem that is underneath every other problem that's not being solved or adequately addressed in our country. Why? Because as Catherine and Michael Porter point out in their research, our current system does not reward problem solving. In fact, if you dare to try to solve a big problem in Congress and you work across party lines, what's going to happen to you next election cycle? You are going to be primaried. It's now become a verb, right? You will be primaried if you're a Republican from someone farther to your right, if you're a Democrat from someone farther to your left. When we pass final five voting in Wisconsin, you now take the primary threat off the table entirely and you reward common sense problem solving. I had a chance to go up to Alaska earlier this year and see the new system in action firsthand, and the results are tremendous. They're undeniable that it is better, a far superior governing environment now in Alaska than it was under the old system. And anyone who's honest in Alaska will tell you that.
So give us a little description of what Final Five voting is and what you saw as a result in Alaska and the other places where it's being used.
Sure. So the bipartisan legislation that's currently pending in Wisconsin for Final Five voting, and I want to make sure not to forget to mention, there's going to be a hearing in Wisconsin, in Madison, next week, Tuesday, on Senate Bill 528 for Final Five voting. And in Wisconsin, it's for congressional elections only. So only for the U.S. House of Representatives and the U.S. Senate. That is the only elections, those are the only elections that will be impacted by Final Five voting. It starts with a top 5 primary election. All of the candidates, regardless of party affiliation, will be on one ballot. And the voter can choose the best person, regardless of party, one vote in the primary. The top 5 will advance to November. And in November, the voter has the choice of voting for one or voting for their top choice and ranking as many candidates as they would prefer. And really, the big picture, Rusty, is allowing every voter to choose the best candidate regardless of party affiliation and having real competition in November. It currently, under the current system, it's somewhere between 85 to 90% of our elections are not competitive in November. And that's a huge problem. It's a lack of competition that's getting us such terrible results in Congress.
Really well put.
Rusty,
Thank you.
Eric,
Josh,
Rusty, could
yeah, go ahead.
Yes, sir. Oh, I just thought maybe we could add to that before we go on. Would that be all right, sir?
Sure, please.
Yeah, so in addition to how Final Five works, I think it's important for us to talk about, especially since we're considering the veteran perspective, why we think that's going to be such a huge change. So right now, you're looking at 10, 15, and at most 25% participation in primaries. And that indicates that people feel, and it lines up with low disapproval ratings in Congress, that people feel like their votes don't matter, that there's no reason for them to show up. Even if they do vote, that the election system doesn't have integrity. We believe, and we think about incentives from a military point of view. How do you incentivize, various ranks and various units to get missions done? So we're looking at this mission focus, and we're saying, maybe if we do this, not only will we have more competition, but we might start to restore some faith in our American system, in our American democracy. And so I kind of wanted to highlight that a little bit, because we are talking about this from a military point of view. A lot of veterans, they come home and they see a country that doesn't trust its government. Well, after you have been fighting for that government, that can be quite disheartening. You come home and you realize that the system sort of feels rigged in a way. People feel that way about not just the government, but they feel that way about the economy. They feel that way about their personal growth. It's difficult to progress and have homes and family and investments. It's becoming increasingly challenging. And individuals throughout our economic system, to include inside of the political system, have learned the game. This is not a new game, it's an old game. And so this restructuring of this system is designed to make the game more competitive for the politicians so that they can benefit us, but it's also designed to improve our quality of life so that we are more invested. We do want to show up to the polls. We do understand how it works, and that more choices is better. And so I just kind of wanted to add some of those things, because that's what, when we go to local events and things like that, that's what we discuss. Regardless of what branch you are, what era, regardless if you're Republican or Democrat, we sit around, and Eric will tell you, and we just talk about it. We talk about how can we get this mission done and what does it mean. So for us, it means a more engaged population. And hopefully it means more people not just believing in the political system, but proud to be an American again, proud to participate and lead civic groups. We're looking at sort of the overall future of what it means to be a volunteer and a good citizen. And one of the things I learned at America's Warrior Partnership when I worked there was that the number one request for veterans seeking service was community and volunteer activities. Now keep that in mind when you have healthcare requests, assistance with disability, VA claims, homelessness, housing, all of those things, critical things necessary to live. But the number one request that we would kind of see through in many of our cases was community. And so it's not just about change the world. I am a non-political actor, never ran for office. I guess I'm a political actor now, but previously I wasn't. I didn't grow up or was groomed. I'm not running for any office now. I'm not paid. I just think these things are worth saying because these are the things we say in public. But we're a real grassroots organization. And you see a lot of organizations that like to appear that way, but they don't have people who are actually non-paid, non-involved, non-benefiting. That's what's really cool about, Veterans for All Voters, which I realize the name changed there, which that's okay. We're growing and we're expanding. But the key to what we're doing is trying to make it cool and accessible to be active in politics, trying to make voting real and tangible matters. And this seems like a small step, but so was separation of powers, right? So was just a single amendment. One rule can change the entire structure. And so to go back to your question, Rusty, like, why do we pick this thing? I really want to just drive it. We picked this thing because we believe that this one step will begin to reframe those incentives in politics. We want politicians to be incentivized not to support their party, but to support the people. Not to fight a speculative hot button issue in a primary, but to tackle real issues that we need help with now. Really critical issues. So having a baby in 6 months, I'm very excited. It's my first one. I want childcare to be affordable. I want childcare to be considered. It doesn't necessarily have to be cheaper. It's not about my personal finance, but I want it to be something that is on the front of my representative's mind, because to me, that's a top tier issue. And how do we get there? Well, we get there by encouraging these politicians to operate like military leaders, mission focused, and they understand that if they don't achieve the mission, get the votes, then they're out of the game. So just to kind of really highlight the veteran aspect of it, because I understand that that's what makes us unique, and that's what makes us connectable.
I really appreciate the passion that both of you are showing with all of this. First, Eric, and then Josh, tell us how you're organizing this effort. Tell us how the nationwide organization is coming together, how many people are working in that, and then Josh, if you could tell us about the statewide initiative. So, Eric, let's start with you about your organization.
Sure. So my co-founder, Todd Connor, and I are and then our head of brand, Jameson. Todd and I are both Navy veterans. Jameson is an Army veteran. We're the 3-person headquarters staff. We had another co-founder, Dan Biga, a Marine Corps veteran. So we launched, as I said, 2 years ago, a little over 2 years ago in Wisconsin, and we now have almost 300 volunteer veteran state leaders in 47 states, and we exist to serve reform campaigns in cities and states around the country. So we aren't, at least not yet, we're not the first in, we're not starting these reform campaigns. We're bringing the veteran voice to bear, bringing some of America's most trusted messengers to help repair some of our least trusted institutions by being laser focused on nonpartisan reforms and really serving the reform movement writ large, which there's close to 10,000 reform organizations. There's 40 or 50,000 veteran service organizations, but there wasn't anyone bringing those two worlds together in a really meaningful, impactful way. So that's why we launched, and we're making great progress. I can talk more about states that are looking at passing Final Five voting here in 2024 or 2026. But first, I'll hand it off to Josh to talk about the great work he's been doing in Wisconsin with Kevin Miller and Mark Fost and others.
Yeah, sure. I'll tell you this much. It is amazing, the team that we have. And I kind of have been bringing up the diversity part, but it's such a cool thing. Different branches, different experiences, lifers, high combat people, more admin people, officers, enlisted, like every type of military person. And so that's one of the coolest things about being in the military. You have these common core values. You have sworn an oath to protect the Constitution, and you see people like me, even all the way down to our youngest, all the way down to our oldest, sharing that same exact value, unwavering in the vision, in that vision. And so if you listen to a lot of media outlets and things like that, you'll notice that there is sort of that narrative that like, oh, there's a division between the classes, there's a division between ages, there's a division between generations. And part of veteran all voters' success is that we're starting to see that a lot of that division is manufactured, right? Because election innovation is scary. Statewide, you know, we go to every place we possibly can. It's like Eric said, we're aggressively nonpartisan. So we think to ourselves, hey, let's go talk to a group that leans really liberal. Let's talk to one that's really conservative. Let's talk to middle of the road. Let's talk to every single person in America. And part of that mission I was kind of bringing out, it's not just to pass Final Five, but also to encourage people to run for office, to increase the competition by, you know, encouraging their friends to run for office, writing petitions, writing letters. You know, when we started this, Eric was asking me, what's our next action item? We're always, despite living our lives, taking care of our families, working multiple jobs, we're always trying to move that ball forward. And so where have we been? We've been to libraries, we've been to gun shows, we've been to fairs, we've been to trade shows, we've been to community organization events, you know, just community activism events. We've worked with city council members, you know, we've worked all the way up with, you know, various senators. And I mean, there's a lot of people who are sponsoring, you know, this bill. So we're seeing the traction and we're putting the time in. So it's very cool. One of the things, you know, that we see as a potential challenge, and this is just by virtue of Final Five. Okay. If you are in power, if you have a district that's on lock, you're not incentivized for this. This makes it more competitive. Well, if you're already winning the race, you don't want it to be more competitive. So it's a difficult thing to look at people in the eye who are incumbents or statistically have a really great chance of winning their district and saying, hey, even if it's not even going, the law's not going to affect their particular district, they might feel like it because they've associated with a party. Most people have associated with a party. And so if they feel like their party's going to lose, if they feel like their party's going to miss out, then they immediately start to think, well, how can I protect my tribe? And what we want to do, and this is part of that veteran thing, your tribe is America, right? Your tribe is your American brothers and sisters. We need you to come together for us first. And then after like we ungridlock Congress and we start passing laws and we start taking care of business and our quality of life, everybody goes up, then you can go back to fighting about your teams, right? We're just not there right now. So one of the big hurdles is to convince people in power or people whose party are in power or people who feel like they just distrust everything, so all innovation can be bad, convincing them that we are here not to change or uproot their life, but to include them and to include ourselves. So it's a civic reimagining of what really I was taught in grade school, what I was taught in the military. So it's really cool to bring up the background, the things that inspire me.
That's a terrific perspective. Eric, I'm curious, are veterans responding to your message about Final Five voting?
They really are, Rusty. And sometimes it takes a number of conversations, but that's the beautiful thing about the veteran connection is whether it's a veteran who's a Republican legislator or a Democratic legislator, they're going to take the call. They're going to open
Eric,
their
we've
door.
lost your.
Oh, am I not coming through?
Why don't you go ahead and try again?
Can you all, could you not hear me at all? Rusty.
Let's try one more time, Eric.
Okay, checking 1, 2, 3. Can you hear me? Okay. Some of the folks in the chat say they hear me fine. So I wonder if it's something over where you are, Rusty. Yeah, Lee. I guess Lee is saying you all can't hear. Josh, can you hear me? Okay.
Yes, I can.
Okay. So,
yeah, everyone can hear you but me, and that's okay. I'll read the lips.
Okay, I'll keep talking until someone cuts me off. Lawyers don't have a problem with that, right, Josh? So I lost my train of thought, but yeah, veterans are really responding to this call to continue serving, to continue honoring our oath. Because 60% of veterans, at least 50%, don't identify as a Republican or Democrat, They are looking for ways to serve in politics without having to be partisan. And that's the platform we're giving them, is to step out. You can get involved. You can do something that's going to be a real solution that the two parties aren't really talking about or focused on. And you don't have to be partisan. And so people like Josh and Kevin Miller and Mark Fost and 295 other folks have really responded to this call to action. And we can't thank them enough.
Great to hear. I'm curious, both of you. Let's start with Josh. I have a good question here from a political science emeritus in our community who's known throughout the state. If Senate Bill 528 passes, do you see follow-up legislation that would be directed at Final Five voting for the state legislative and statewide offices, not just the congressional races?
No, it's a great question. Thank you so much, Joe. Yeah, Rusty. I mean, I don't have any inside information that that's going to happen. We certainly, if our theory is accurate, then we will see the benefits from Final Five voting, as we are already seeing in Maine and Alaska, and those benefits will become the new standard, right? I'm a big fan of that marble cake federalism. I'm glad that we're testing it, in small batches over time. That's how change in America should be done. I'm an independent as well, and so I always like to think of the areas where I'm conservative, the areas where I'm liberal. I tend to have a pretty wide open. And one of the big things for me is slow change is important change. You don't want mob rule. You don't want rapid disruption to our democracy. And so, do I think it will happen? I certainly hope so, if my theory is right. I'm obviously extremely confident that my theory on the importance of Final Five is right. But this time, I'm not sure, and I'm not sure what the timeframes would be. That's a little bit more political strategy, which is maybe more Eric's territory.
Josh, what are you seeing nationally? Do you see more states going to this process?
Well, I mean, I'm from Georgia. That's my hometown, as I mentioned earlier. And I remember before I had any idea, I had not done any sort of undergrad or master's or any formal education whatsoever beyond high school civics. And I remember doing Final Five voting on the ship. I did Final Five voting in the 2008 presidential election. And to me, that signals something, that the U.S. military and the state of Georgia, and there's other states to do it. I think there's maybe 8 or something. I'm not sure about the exact number, but when Georgia had us do Final Five voting in 2007, it's because, as military members, it's because there's a recognition that that type of voting is really efficient. It's really effective, right? It's a great way that if there's this runoff to be able to calculate it. And so I mean, there is probably, I don't know the exact count because it changes all the time, but there's roughly 15 to 20 states that have different versions of Final Five voting in state, local offices, in counties, right? So, and then once again in the military. So this experiment, this Final Five experiment, to see this innovation in play is already happening. Sorry, I think, did that answer the question?
Yeah, it did. Eric, I'm curious. Can you update us on the status of Final Five voting in some other states? We know that there's discussion in Wisconsin. We know about Alaska. You just mentioned that. Can you give us a bit of a rundown on your success at getting this conversation moving in other states?
Sure. Right. So Alaska is the prototype. And again, I'd encourage anyone who's interested to learn more. Kathy Giesel is the Senate Majority Leader in Alaska. She opposed the ballot amendment for Final Four voting. It's a version of Final Five, just one less choice. She opposed it in 2020, and now she is literally traveling the country telling other state legislators how much better the governing environment is in Alaska. They have a balanced budget. They have a bipartisan governing coalition. The most extreme partisans have been pushed to the sidelines, and the adults in the room are back in charge. And that's what we want to see in Congress. This Final Five voting in Wisconsin is to fix a dangerously dysfunctional Congress. And I would encourage every person listening to go to your state legislator and say, do you think Congress is working for the American people? If they say yes, I question if they're paying attention. Most honest people will say no. Then say, what is your solution? What is your solution to make Congress work for the exhausted majority, for the reasonable majority of Americans that want to get problems solved and things moving forward? So other states that are responding, Nevada has a ballot amendment for Final Five voting. We will pass it again in 2024. Idaho has a ballot amendment for Final Four voting. Colorado is going to have a ballot amendment. Arizona has a version of this. South Dakota has a ballot amendment to open their primary elections. Washington, D.C., very interesting. As an independent, I'm sometimes called a double hater. I like to say I'm an equal opportunity offender. In Washington, D.C., it's the Democratic Party of Washington, D.C. that's suing the ballot campaign for a version of Final Five voting that would allow 86,000 independent voters to fully participate in their public elections. And in Idaho, it was the Republican Party suing the campaign team. So this is what I would say. You go and talk to folks who are partisans or party elites or inside the system. They will give you lots of excuses why this is a bad idea. It's all gaslighting to maintain the status quo. And we, the people, need to get smart on what are real solutions versus false gaslighting that's sold to us day in and day out by the politics industry.
Terrific. I'm curious, Josh, as you talk to veterans, are you getting a positive reception from, let's say, more positive from younger veterans than older, or are you seeing any change?
Those two demographics, I would say no, I would not. Now, there is obviously a little bit of bias that might happen when you're operating a booth or you're out and about. You see somebody who looks exactly like you, like they might be right at my age. Obviously, that might be the best initial connection. But when it comes to the actual, we're in the conversation, we're discussing, political innovation and how Congress is gridlocked and how Congress is broken. What's interesting and what I tend to notice is that veterans almost right away say, "Man, I've been thinking that." Right. And like it's really affirming, and it keeps our mission going. It keeps our growth really rapid. It's kind of like Eric said, it was three veterans that started with this idea, and it wasn't this huge, ultra funded, mega big, secret dark funded campaign. It was just as easy as going to veterans and saying, "Hey, do you think Congress is broken?" To ask that question that Eric asked, and veterans, their eyes light up. Man, it really is, because we have had that privilege of being in our branches, in our units, and seeing what it means to get things done. Every person has these values. When you go into a meeting, you go into a unit brief, you go into a squad leader huddle, whatever it's called for your particular unit, you go in and you have this vision of getting things done, and you have the value of doing it on behalf of America. And veterans, we're just really suited for seeing the polarization, because in boot camp, across all the branches, and they may have different versions of the verbiage, they say, "We bleed green." You're not bringing that stuff in here, because it's recognized very early on that political polarization reduces efficiency. It reduces productivity. It doesn't help people get things done to improve their quality of life. It just makes them virtue angry. And I think that's that very basic lesson that you learn probably within the first month of entering your branch of service is now, playing out on a grand scale. And so veterans really understand that. When you say, "Oh man, we're gridlocked," yeah, I wish this or I wish that. And we have different views. If there's a wide spectrum of views, every view you could imagine. But the idea that Congress isn't working is set, that we don't trust our government as much as we'd like to is set, that they're not efficient is set, and that the reason they're not efficient is because of the gridlock. Now, there may be veterans who think, "Oh, well, there are other reasons," right? There may be veterans who say, "This particular politician let me down," and that's fine too. But as long as our core values are there, we're able to march together.
Terrific. Josh, I'm wondering, both in Wisconsin, Eric, if I may, this election in Wisconsin, but also nationwide, clearly is just so critical in 2024. I hear more and more people say, well, how do I make sure that I'm keeping up with things, that I can do my own research, that I can have some trust in the information that I'm getting? So I'm curious, Eric, from your perspective, what can citizens do to promote election integrity?
There's a couple suggestions I would have is, if you haven't done this, go visit your local election officials and go see how hard they work, how well run those offices are. Here in St. Louis, where I live, it's one Democrat, one Republican, and the Republican happens to be a Navy veteran, Rick Stream. When you see it up front and you see all the secondary and third ways there of security and that they do, it's very, very impressive. And then just telling other folks, I know people have questions about election integrity, and I oftentimes was the first person telling them, look, this is what I do day in and day out. I know local election officials who are veterans who've had their life threatened over misinformation about our elections. They are safe and secure, absolutely, period, at the end of the sentence, right? And just us sharing that message one person at a time, I think, is the best thing we can do.
Terrific. Josh, as a younger citizen, tell us how you try to plug into the information that you feel you need to make informed choices when it comes to an election.
Yeah, so I mean, I have a bit of a luxury because I'm at the University of Wisconsin, and my wife works on the political science floor. So those are a lot of the guys. But I would highly recommend, checking out the legis.wisconsin.gov, I think it is. I normally type in the shortcut. Go take a look at your bills. If you don't understand a proposed bill or proposed resolution, that's totally fine. Even the legislators themselves ask for help, but reach out to me, right? Reach out to Eric, reach out to local activist groups. They're all over the state of Wisconsin. And when I was in Georgia, they're there too. There are people who are advocating for things. The best thing you can do is to reach out to all of those sources, and you follow the same methods that you would in college curriculum, where you look at the source, the veracity of the source, the number of sources that exist, and you evaluate it just like you would anything else. But I think official government websites are a great place to start. And when it comes to how things like Final Five work, if you go to a local Final Five event, and they're all over the state of Wisconsin, and they are also national, but in various densities, you can see what it looks like to have all those first, votes counted, and then we can do demonstrations where the ones who had the least votes is knocked out. Now the second place, we go through those movements, and research is one answer. But if you're just a normal person, you're working and living your life, the real answer is to go get some community. Take it upon yourself, accept the challenge that you have a responsibility to help maintain the society, that you have a duty of thoughtfulness to other people. And that duty of thoughtfulness means that you have to go and take steps to learn. You can't just hold your hands up high, not when the stakes are this high. In our economy, in our criminal system, in our healthcare system, we really are more integrated and more dependent on each other than we've ever been before. So if you're a citizen out there, I would just encourage you to take action, to make community. And if you make enough community, you will eventually learn. That's what learning is. It's repetition and exposure. Just don't be in a silo, not one party or the other. But that's a little bit of my personal advice. Obviously, party advocates are just as welcome as independents.
Terrific. We've spent a lot of time on election integrity and Final Five voting. But Eric, I'm curious, from a nationwide perspective, what are the sorts of things that you're hearing from veterans as being, let's say, the key issues that they're concerned about?
Many veterans that I speak to they're very concerned about the suicide epidemic that continues to plague the veteran community. They're very concerned about the lack of adequate health care coming from the Veterans Administration. in so many different areas, government and our bureaucracy needs to be innovated. It needs to be improved. And we are just stymied in partisan gridlock. And compromise is now a dirty word. And veterans they just want to see our elected leaders solving problems. And they're tired of the showmanship, the grandstanding, the self-serving, tweets that get you followers and somehow raise money by doing just ridiculous antics. And so it's a variety of issues, Rusty, but I think veterans are very concerned about being well taken care of after they serve. And some of our brothers and sisters are not being well taken care of by the system, and that's a huge problem.
Seems like fairly common sense priorities, and I can understand why there are concerns that they're not being answered. Eric, thank you too, and I'll tell our viewers, Eric has shared in the chat a couple of good links that help you understand more about Final Five voting and understand about Veterans for All Voters, the organization as well. So I would encourage our viewers to take a look at those links. One of the things that we talk a lot about when it comes to elections, campaigns, is money. And money drives a lot of the discussion. We, in January, had recently retired Congressman Ron Kind talking about campaign finance reform. I'm curious from a veteran's perspective. Let's ask Josh. Tell us what your thoughts are about campaign finance reform and the types of things that need to happen so that it's more of a fair playing field.
Sure. I hope it's all right. I maybe should start with a brief disclaimer that I'm by no means an expert in campaign finance, but I'm happy to share. And I say that not just to make the disclaimer blindly, but to be very clear that when it comes to the Final Five voting, I've been in the community talking about that on a mass scale. So I can kind of speak for veterans. In this particular instance, I probably can't speak for every veteran, but I can speak a little bit about what I think personally. And when it comes to campaign finance reform, it is pretty clear that something needs to be done, right? Like it's similar to the gridlock in Congress that I'm pretty aware that it polls pretty high as a problem regardless of your party. And so that's the stuff that we look for. We look for these nonpartisan similarities so we can draw people together and form them into action. Specifically when it comes to our government, there needs to be an extremely, and I'm thinking of Constitution, there needs to be an exceptionally compelling reason. There need to be really important reasons. These are kind of the words you hear in law, compelling, for why we wouldn't disclose. And so for me, a basic first step is sort of a pure transparency. It's not so speech can be silenced, but it's so that if a person is able or an entity is able to donate a significant amount of money, that at least the citizens can see who's backing them. And especially at this point now, we understand that individual actors, politicians and lobbyists, they have sort of groups that they get money from. And so I think just having transparency as a first step is something I think we could all agree on. I'm not sure what the limit should be. And that's where I think there might be more partisan divides. And so I would avoid those landmines.
Clearly, huge amounts of money are being spent on campaigns. Eric, you talked about the need to make sure that we're caring for our veterans. That clearly costs plenty of money. So, Eric, from your perspective, tell us what your thoughts are about campaign finance reform and the sorts of things that need to happen to boost election integrity.
Sure. So it's a huge concern that gets brought up maybe more than anything in conversations around the country. We have a national partner. Veterans for All Voters is part of a national ecosystem of effort. There's the Nonpartisan Association the National Association of Nonpartisan Reformers we're a part of, and one of our partner organizations called American Promise is working to pass the 28th Amendment to undo some of the negative impacts of Citizens United. So that's their primary issue, and we support them tangentially. I want to bring this conversation about money in politics and partisan primaries together. Oftentimes an objection we hear to the final five voting system is, I don't want Democrats voting for Republicans or Republicans voting for Democrats. The irony is this: the current system in Wisconsin allows for one party to manipulate the other party's outcomes in their primary by spending money on the worst possible candidate. That has happened in Wisconsin. It's happened in Michigan and states across the country. Guess what happens in final five voting? That goes away. Why? Because you're not going to spend money on someone you're competing directly against in the first round of voting. So the top five open primary with everyone on one ballot, no party is going to spend money against someone they're directly competing against. It actually solves the problem. But we hear gaslighting, frankly, from legislators on both sides tell me why an open single ballot primary is a bad idea, and they don't have any solutions that are real from my perspective.
That's a great perspective. Eric and Josh, I greatly value the service that you provided both in the military but after the military, taking an active role in trying to boost trust and integrity in an election process that clearly has some real challenges right now. So you're both to be commended for your excellent work, for bringing these issues to our attention and at taking such great time with us today. So I greatly appreciate both of you for all of those good reasons. So thank you very much. At this time, I'm going to turn everything over to the Executive Director of Leader Ethics, Lee Rosh.
Well, again, I want to thank our presenters today, Eric and Josh. You did a wonderful job in explaining the important and compelling work of the Veterans for All Voters. And Rusty, I want to thank you again for your professionalism as moderator today. So now, if you wonder what you can do to support the Final Five voting initiative in Wisconsin, here's a suggestion. There will be a public legislative hearing on Senate Bill 528 very shortly. And if you go online, you can register in support of this legislation by going to final5voting.info. It's a very simple process, only takes a couple of minutes. And public support, as with any legislation, public support is vitally important. Again, I want to thank our presenters today, and to all, as audience members, I wish you the best wishes in service. Thank you.